We're continuing to make our way through First Kings. We're up to chapter 15. We've spent a lot of time, certainly, with David, 66 chapters. We spent a lesser amount of time with Solomon, and now the kings are going to come at us fairly quickly. I would encourage you to read ahead. I don't know how the clock is going to behave, so I'll make these comments up front. We might be done early. I might not be done in time, but we're going to finish chapter 16 one way or the other. I want to encourage you to read ahead, starting in chapter 17. It's all about Elijah. Ahab is the king, but the main personality is Elijah. Don't just study. Go out there to Google, read Wikipedia, read whatever it says about Elijah. What a fantastic personality. And there's so much for us to learn. So I think you get a lot more out of it if you dig into it on your own, and then we'll pull things together. There's a schematic of the kings that have followed Solomon, and you can see on the very top Rehoboam on the south and Jeroboam on the north. They're both dead. And now we're going to take a look at Asa. And of course, you see that all the kings in the northern tribes were bad, and the kings in the southern tribes, they had some good guys blended in with the bad guys. Now let's think about this. Reigning for 41 years. In our country, we get a re-election of a president every 4 years, a senator every 6 years, a representative every 2 years. And depending upon which party's in favor, you can see our nation swinging one way or the other way, seems like constantly. But imagine 40 years under David, and it isn't just some despot. The Bible tells us that all the people took notice of David, and it pleased him, and everything the king did pleased all the people. That's followed with 40 years of Solomon, and the Bible says that the people were happy. They were affluent, they were secure, they were safe. And now Solomon's heart turned, the nation split. We have another 41 years in contrast to what you see over on the right. And so let's take a look at Asa. As we go through these First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, you'll see some standard phrases. And I'm going to introduce them, and then when we get to them, we're just going to, blow right through them. First of all, you see, in the 18th reign, in the Xth reign of King so-and-so, he's going to reign over the north or the south. That's so that people, the numbers jockeys, can figure out who's from first, who's on second, and where it is in the timeline. For the casual reader, your eyes are just going to jump right over those things. Then you see the duration of the kingdom, same situation. You'll see the heritage, the genealogy. But this is a really interesting genealogy. Except for that one line in Leviticus, the only time a mother is mentioned in the genealogy, the Old Testament, in the New Testament, they mention Rahab and they mention Tamar. But look at all this. It's all in Kings and it's all in Chronicles. And the message to me is this. We've been putting pressure on the dads the last few weeks because of David not being a great dad. I'm convinced the reason that the mothers are mentioned is that mom has a great influence on the kids. Moms have a very special job too. His mother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom, and he walked in all the sins that his father did before. And we're going to see that same situation, like father, like son. And his heart was not truly, his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. And the epitaph, there was war, he slept with his fathers. And then, of course, you complete the genealogy by saying, who's going to take the next place? Now, what's interesting in the South is you keep seeing the son took the place. What we're going to see in the North in the second half of this hour, that there's going to be conspiracy, there's going to be assassination, there's going to be one dynasty, another dynasty. One dynasty lasted a whopping 7 days. Another dynasty, 24 years. But two very different nations out of the same bloodline. The Hebrew language historically had no word for grandfather and no word for grandmother. And so when you start studying the son of, he could be the grandson, he could be the great grandson, but this is an interesting situation. Abijam, or he's also called Abijah, depending on what translation you're looking at, he's the king between Rehoboam and Asa. And I want you to take note as to who his mom is, Maacah. All right? Because when we get to Asa, we're going to see again those standard phrases. And you see his mother's name was Maacah. That's because it was his grandmother, unless there was something very strange going on. And Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Another key phrase. In the South, many times you have an opportunity of seeing he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And in the North, every king has the same epitaph. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. And the heart of Asa was wholly true to the Lord all his days. Now we're going to find that Asa had a dark side, but the Bible tells us that his heart was wholly true to the Lord. Now there's a phrase that I've been entertaining a lot lately. The heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. So what do we know about the heart? Jeremiah tells us that the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? One of my favorite pastors tells us that when he first met his wife when he was recovering from surgery, he looked up and he saw this woman. He said, "I love you with all my heart." She looked down and said, "The heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it?" They ended up marrying, beautiful family, but that was the introduction. There you see Abijam. His heart was not truly following the Lord. And then you see Asa, his heart wholly true to the Lord. So what kinds of a heart can we have? So first, a divided heart. And you know that in Wednesdays we're going through Hosea as the first of the minor prophets. And Hosea says their heart is divided. Now they shall be found faulty. He shall break down their altars. He shall spoil their images. They were divided in that on the one hand, they were ritualistic to the Lord. On the other hand, they were ritualistic to Baal. They were divided. A lukewarm heart. And this is Revelation, and it's Jesus' condemnation of the church of Laodicea, which is the church age that we're in right now. He said, "So, because you are lukewarm, you're neither hot nor cold, I will spew you out of my mouth." You know, hot water has the power of cleansing. Cold water has the power of refreshing. But Jesus is saying you're neither cleaning it up and you're not refreshing yourselves. You're just blah. A lukewarm heart. Then we have the wavering heart. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given to him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Now, this is related to the heart. But where is the instability? Where is the double-minded? It's in the faith. There's a doubt there. Yeah, the Bible says, ask and you receive, but I've been asking and I'm not receiving. That is a really interesting phrase because it's not just saying ask like a command. It's a progressive. Keep asking. And the next half is also progressing. Keep asking, and it'll keep being given to you. It's not like God is the great giver up in heaven and God, please give me a brand new Mercedes. It's not going to happen. But if I ask for my daily bread, if I keep asking, he'll keep giving. So a wavering heart. Then you have half-hearted devotion. serving God outwardly, but lacking true commitment. You know, there are 168 hours in the week. Well, you guys will give us 2 hours because we have Sunday school and worship service. If you give 2 hours to God and 166 hours to everybody else, I would call that half-hearted devotion. Isaiah tells us this: because this people draw near with their mouth and honor me with their lips, their heart is far from me. You know, there are some great gospel songs, and I love the ones that are peppy, okay? I have a good friend who is Amishman, and we were talking. I said to him, so what are Amish tunes like, the worship tunes? And he started giving me one. It was just, I said, what is that? He said, that's to keep yourself out of the tune, and it's just pure worship. Okay. You can get a catchy tune, but your heart is not there. Half-hearted devotion. And their fear of me is a commandment taught by men. This will tie you back to the Pharisees of Jesus' day. The people there, they were scared to death of the Pharisees. Of course, Jesus put them in their place. An adulterous heart, spiritually unfaithful, chasing after other loves. Ezekiel tells us this: then those of you who escape, he's talking about escaping the Babylonian captivity, those of you who escape will remember me among the nations where they're carried captive, how I have been broken over their whoring heart that has departed from me, and over their eyes that go whoring after their idols. The reason the southern kingdom was deported, certainly the downward slide of each of their kings and therefore the people, but Manasseh was the bottom of the barrel. He was the one who introduced sacrificing babies to Molech. And at that point, God said, I've had enough. There were other kings afterwards, but it was the guilt of Manasseh that put them in, a whoring heart. Back to Asa. And Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. I mentioned that's one of the standard phrases in the book, as his father had done. He put away all the male cult prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. So he's on the right track. He also removed his grandmother. His grandmother was the queen mother, and why was she kicked out of favor? Because she had made an abominable image of Asherah. Now, Asherah was the goddess of fertility, and so the way to worship Asherah were through all kinds of strange sex acts, and that's where the male prostitutes were participating. And there I have the preceding king whose biological mother really was. And Asa cut down the image of Asherah and burned it at the brook of Kidron. And he brought into the house of the Lord the sacred gifts of his father and his own sacred gifts, silver and gold and vessels. Now, last week we talked about Rehoboam, and Rehoboam was attacked by Shishak, and Rehoboam took all of the gold and the silver and everything that was in the house. You can see through the phrase there, he took everything. And the gold plating that was on the shields became brass. They went from glorifying God to the judgment of God. Now, those shields had never been returned to gold. The judgment of God was on the people from that point forward. But now we're going to see something interesting here. Asa has his wholly following, wholly true to the Lord. And what he's doing now, he's saying, okay, we're going to restore some of the glory. We're going to restore some of the gold back to the temple. Well, in a few clicks, we're going to run into that Asa had a dark side as well. And what happened was, when pressure was on, Asa went back and he took all that gold and he gave it to a foreign king to try to buy an alliance. He made a dedication to God, and then he took it back. Romans chapter 12 tells us that we're supposed to present our bodies holy and acceptable, lay it on the altar. My problem is that I dedicate myself and then I take it back. So we're going to get to that when we get to the downside of Asa. And he gathered all Judah and Benjamin. Keep in mind, he was the king of the south, and those from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon who were residing in the north, for great numbers had deserted to him from Israel when they saw that the Lord was with his God, that his God was with him. So what do we derive from something like that? Here's this king down in the south. He's taking care of the people. He's putting out the male prostitutes. He even put his grandmother out of the court. Be winsome and win some. The word winsome means to be attractive. Now, you can be beautiful to look at, but you're not a very attractive person. Winsome means to be attractive in your heart, to be the right kind of person. And just like Asa was like a person magnet because people saw that God was with him, we could be people magnets too. The Bible says, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he that winneth souls is wise. So how do you do something like that? The world would call me a Bible thumper. Well, I look at it a different way. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, and always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you with gentleness and respect. Walking around pounding doesn't get you anywhere. But to live your life where God is raised up as holy. And then when an opportunity comes, think about it with gentleness and respect. We could be winsome and win some for the Lord, just like Asa was doing. He was pulling people out of the north back to the south. But Asa had a dark side. We read the first part of this verse, but look at the second half. But the high places were not taken away. The places where there were other altars. There was the temple in Jerusalem. There were other altars where people were doing their thing. Well, this is interesting. In the 36th year of the reign of Asa, we said that he was a good king. We said that he reigned for 41 years. But now towards the tail end, here comes the dark side. On the 36th year, Baasha, the king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might permit no one to go out or come in to Asa, the king of Judah. So what happens? Just like the Berlin Wall was built by the East Germans, or by the communists, so that the people couldn't come over, these people basically built something so that he couldn't lose any more of his people, probably couldn't lose any more of his tax revenue to the south. Then Asa took silver and gold from the treasures of the house of the Lord and the king's house, and sent them to Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, who lived in Damascus. Now, Ben-Hadad is an interesting name. It means son of Hadad. And there is a guy in the Bible named Hadad, but it's also the name given to the gods up in Syria. Now, I want you to look at what he has to say. There is a covenant between me and you, as there was between my father and your father. So I'm thinking, okay, what covenant was that? We just studied David and Solomon, Rehoboam. I took a good hard look. I even used AI. I couldn't find any covenant between Ben-Hadad or Hadad with the people of Israel. Did he make it up? Was he greasing the skids, if you will, so that he could make something happen? He says, so there was a covenant between us, so I'm going to send you some treasure. Go and break your covenant with the north, that he might withdraw from me. Well, the Bible doesn't even say that Baasha was attacking him. It simply said he was building a wall to stop anybody else from going. If you have your chronological Bible, you'll see First and Second Kings, and First and Second Chronicles, and some of the Psalms all mashed together. So here's Second Chronicles. At that time, Hananiah the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you relied on the king of Syria, that's what we just talked about. He gave the gold and silver to the king of Syria and did not rely on the Lord your God. The army of the kings of Syria has escaped you. The Lord had it in his mind that Syria was going to fall to Judah, but it didn't happen. And he's also going to allude to something else here. Were not the Ethiopians and the Libyans a huge army? Now think about the geography. There's Israel, and down over on the northwest of Africa is Libya, and down much farther than that is Ethiopia, and undocumented, this is a seer of the Lord, so it's got to be true, undocumented, Asa's winning battles all over the northern half of Africa. And he says, okay, you won those, but what's your problem? There's a great verse. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give support to those whose heart is blameless toward him. Asa was wholly true to the Lord, but out came his dark side. And what Hananiah was saying was, if you had stayed wholly true to the Lord would continue to support you. But too bad for you, you're going to spend the rest of your days in war. So Asa, instead of listening to what Hananiah had to say, instead of heeding the word of the Lord, instead of listening what the pastor had to say, instead of applying it to our hearts, he gets angry with the seer. He gets angry with the pastor. And Asa inflicted cruelties upon some of the people. He didn't just pick just on the guy who delivered the message. He picked on everybody else as well. So now we go from the 36th to the 39th year of the 41 years. In the 39th year of his reign, Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease, he did not seek the Lord. Now, there's nothing wrong with going to the doctor. He sought help from the Lord. But you know, the great healer is not the doctor. It's not the AMA. It's Jesus. He's the great physician. And Asa made the mistake. Yeah, go to the doctor. That's why they're there. That's why the Lord allowed people to invent medicines and medical procedures. But he forgot about the Lord. And then Asa died. Where can I look? Asa went and looked at the physicians instead of looking at the Lord. People from the north, on top of people of the south, were looking at to Asa. But let me tell you something. No matter what human being you decide to follow as a role model, that human being can fall. You know, I was once a big fan of Bill Cosby. Go all the way back to when he was a tennis spy, and then the Bill Cosby Show, and of course the Bill Cosby with Noah and all those kinds of things. And then he started writing books about good fathering, and he started being a spokesperson of how the Black community would come back into family, and they would just lift themselves up with bootstrapping. And then out came the allegations. And whether they're true or false, it's none of my business, but it took the shine off of my idea of Bill Cosby. And you can find many, many other people that have gone that same route. Where do I look? Look to Jesus. He will never fail. Looking to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him. Now, he was not a masochist. Hey, I can't wait to jump on that cross. He was looking beyond the cross. He was looking beyond his resurrection. He was looking beyond his ascension, being back with the Father. He was looking down through the centuries at you and at me, and he was thrilled that we would be saved through his sacrifice, who through the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider Jesus. You can consider Franklin Graham, you can consider Charlie Kirk, you can consider all kinds of other people, and there's a lot to be learned out there. But consider Jesus, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. Why? So that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Say, oh me, oh my. Whatever we're going through, Jesus had it worse. So we're back again to this chart. You see Rehoboam and Jeroboam are done. You see the not sign at Asa. He's died and gone on. And now we're going to take a look at these guys in the north. There are three similar prophecies, and they go word for word. The one is against Jeroboam, one is against Baasha, and one is against Ahab. They're going to die in the city, and the dogs will eat them. And anyone who dies in the open country, the birds of the heavens shall eat. Now, you probably can't see the little green lozenges up there, so I've expanded it for you. Those three prophecies go against those three kings and those three dynasties, if you will, because some of them, the prophecy hits at the sun, S-O-N level. Look at the years, 22, 24, 22, in contrast to 2 years and even 7 days. That was the prophecy, and we're going to see those prophecies unfold. Nadab, which means prince, makes sense. The king names his son. What are you going to name him? He's going to name him Prince. Nadab began to reign. And then Baasha decides he's going to take over the kingdom. So Baasha, he who lays waste, and he laid the prince waste. He conspired against him. You're going to see that again and again. Baasha struck down at Gibeath, which belonged to the Philistines, for Nadab and all Israel were laying siege to Gibeath. And so Baasha killed him in the 3rd year. And as soon as he was the king, he killed off the entire household of Jerusalem in accordance with the word of the prophecy we had just read on the prior slide. So Baasha begins to reign, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And now you see the prophecy that I mentioned to you. Jehu, this is not the same Jehu that you see later on. This is Jehu, simply a prophet. He says, same command, verse 4. And what are we going to see? In the 26th year of Asa, Elah, the son of Baasha, began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years, but his servant Zimri. So Elah was cursed because he only got to reign 2 years, and then he gets killed. He gets killed by this guy named Zimri, wild goat or sheep. Now, I think it's interesting that he was a commander of half the chariots. He was not a general. He was a commander. And what do the chariots do? When the commander says charge, they charge haphazardly in and do their thing. They don't think about anything other than going and killing and breaking things. And that was the personality of Zimri. What we're going to see is Zimri, after 7 days, gets done in by Omri, who's the general. The general understands the strategy, understands the lay of the land. He tells people when to flank. He tells people when to charge, when to retreat, when to send in the cavalry. And the people realize he was the better leader. So Zimri conspired against him, and he kills this guy while he's drunk. Zimri came in and struck him down and killed him. But Zimri did not last long. When he began to reign, as soon as he had seated himself on his throne, he struck down all the house of Baasha. Now think about it. He reigned for a whole week, yet in that week he managed to kill off an entire dynasty. He had his heart set on destruction, just like the chariot. They go in there and they do what they have to do, strike. So Zimri destroyed the whole house, just like was prophesied. And he reigned 7 days. So what happened in those 7 days? There was a battle over there against the Philistines, and over there was a man named Omri, the commander of the army, a strategist. And the people made Omri their king. And they came back to Tirzah, where Zimri was. And Zimri, the commander of the chariot, now the king for 7 days, he doesn't know what to do. So what does he do? He sets the palace on fire and dies. So then the people of Israel were divided again. The first division was north versus south, and now the north is getting divided. And some are saying, we want to follow this guy Tibni, which means cord, and the other guys want to follow this guy named Omri, which means, Tibni meant straw, Omni meant corn. And if I had a choice, if I was in trouble, do I want straw or do I want corn? I'd pick the corn. Straw makes for good bedding, but doesn't make good for food. So they follow Omri. Omri began to reign over Israel. He had 12 years, and he built Samaria. Omri did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did more evil than all who were before him. We're going to see that with Omri, that he was worse than everybody that precedes him. His son is going to become Ahab, and Ahab will have done more than anyone that preceded him. So you can see they're all going down that slippery slope. And we're also going to see that Ahab provoked the Lord more than anyone else. If he could, he got underneath God's skin worse than anybody else could. Omri did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did more evil than all who were before him. For he walked in all the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Well, what did Jeroboam do that got everybody in trouble? So first of all, Jeroboam was the first king of the northern tribes, yet it was his sin that dictated that the whole nation was going to fall. He set up Dan in the north and Bethel in the south, and put golden calves in both. And he didn't want the people to go south. And that's what caused all this stuff to have trouble. Now, the rest of the acts of Omri, they did, and they were written down in the book of the Chronicles. And Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab, his son, reigned in his place. So I got to thinking, there are certain names that I have not run into anybody that has the name Ahab. I've not run into anybody who has the name Judas. I've not run into anybody that has the name Jezebel, but I understand there are some Jezebels that have that name these days, and it'll be interesting to see how that name twisted. So I decided to say, okay, who are some of the people named Ahab? The only one that came back is Ahab from Moby Dick. And that was a specific name because of the man's character. There's also somebody in that book whose name was Ishmael. So Ahab reigned in his place. And Ahab reigned for 22 years. How can the bad guy, worse than anybody prior, reign longer than some of the other guys that had just preceded him? Jeremiah said, why do the wicked flourish? We don't understand why. You'll see somebody like a Job who gets kicked in the teeth left and right. And you'll see some scoundrel who's walking around fancy free. I don't understand it. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all that were before him. Now, this says, and as if it had been a light thing for him, you might as well have said, and on top of that, he didn't just do what was evil in the sight of the Lord. On top of that, what he did was he imported a wife from Phoenicia, from the north, from Sidon, a pagan nation. He took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshiped him. Now, if you try to figure out what the word Jezebel means, you get some interesting translations. Not exalted could mean Jehovah's not exalted. If you take that B-E-L, the E-L is where they get Jehovah is not exalted. If you take B-E-L, that's a suffix that talks about Baal, so Baal is exalted. If you go out and Google, what's the meaning of the name Jezebel, today's Dr. Google, he'll say chaste. Well, I don't know. But it also says defiant. So what is inside those roots, I don't know. But this is what Jesus had to say about Jezebel. He said, I have this against you, Thyatira, from the book of Revelation, that you tolerate this woman who calls herself a prophetess and is teaching and seducing my servants. A Jezebel is somebody who's going to come in and infiltrate and ruin what you have going with the Lord. Pick whatever idol you want. Your boat, your motorcycle, your job, your wife, your kids, yourself. Something is going to sneak in and dilute your whole devotion to the Lord. And that someone, that something is Jezebel. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Everybody said what an Asherah pole was. And Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. The Bible tells us God is a jealous God. When the Bible says, thou shalt not have strange gods before me, it doesn't mean that they're in priority, this God and then this God and then this God, even if Jehovah is number one. He's saying, no other gods in my presence. I want all of you. And so God's a jealous God. God's an angry God. In his days, now this is just a verse that got thrown in here. And you got to ask yourself the question, why is this verse just thrown in? This guy Hiel is not mentioned anywhere else except in this verse. God lives. And his testimony is this. There was a prophecy made 700 years prior who said, if you do something special at Jericho, this and this and this is going to happen. 700 years later, God is still alive, and what God had to say still holds true. And in his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. Now, Jericho was wiped out. You remember they marched around 6 days, and on the seventh day, they marched 7 times. They blew the trumpets, the people shouted, and the walls came tumbling down. But if you study that piece of geography, there have been people living in and around the rubble for a long, long time. But what Joshua said was, don't even think about rebuilding the walls. And so when they say here he built Jericho, they're talking about building it back up to be a fortified city. He laid its foundation at the cost of his firstborn. His firstborn died. Doesn't tell us how the firstborn died. Was he older and he was on construction and he got killed on the construction? We don't know. So he laid the foundation. The foundation is built. And then he set the gates. Cost him his youngest son. Again, we don't know if he was part of the construction crew or if he was sacrificed to give favor to the construction project. According to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, the son of Nun. So what did Joshua have to say? Joshua laid an oath on them at times, saying, cursed be before the Lord be the Lord who rises up and rebuilds the city. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest he shall set up its gates. 700 years prior. So now we can fast forward to where we are 3,000 years later. God still lives, Hiel. And what God has to say in his word still stands. And that takes us to chapter 17. Now, Elijah the Tishbite. And I've got 4 minutes, and I'll say a few things about Elijah. First of all, the Bible never tells us how old he was. He could be a young adult. He could be somebody over the hill. Okay? That means each of us can and should identify with Elijah. He came from this town called Tishba, which is over on Transjordan. He was a nobody. You don't have to be a somebody to make a point. And there's some very special things about Elijah. Just like Jonah, Elijah never said anything about the future. He was always dealing with current events. Elijah never died. He was swept up in a whirlwind. Well, unless the rapture comes, I'm looking forward to going the way of all the earth, to borrow a Bible phrase. But my testimony doesn't have to die. Elijah was there with Moses and Jesus at the Transfiguration. The message to the apostles is when Jesus comes back, he's going to be glorified. And the message we should have to each of our people that we run into is that Jesus is glorified. And finally, Elijah, just like John the Baptist, Elijah's mission was to return the disobedient back to the Lord and to prepare people for his coming. And that's our mission as well. Once again, I invite you, study Elijah, get into your Bibles, chapter 17 and following. Google your brains out on Elijah, and the more you learn, the more you appreciate this man of God.